Michael Turner and Emily Reyes never imagined their routine day in Washington, D.C. would turn into a nightmare when an enormous explosion tore through the city, unleashing secret, betrayal, and a conspiracy that would shake the nation to its core. The morning sun cast a warm glow over Washington, D.C. as the city stirred to life. The National Mall was alive with tourists eager to soak in the historic monuments, while local residents began their daily routines. Street vendors set up stalls, selling everything from hot dogs to souvenirs, and the hum of traffic blended with the distant murmur of political discussions from nearby government offices. It was a typical spring day, bright, bustling, and full of promise. People walked along the sidewalks, chatting and taking pictures, unaware of the tragedy that was about to unfold. At first, everything seemed ordinary. Families gathered near the reflecting pool. Joggers paced past the museums, and office workers grabbed their morning coffee from nearby. The calm of the morning created a false sense of security that soon shattered without warning. Suddenly, an enormous explosion ripped through the air, shaking the ground beneath everyone's feet. The sound was deafening, like a thunderclap magnified many times over, and the force of the blast sent a shockwave racing through the street. Windows trembled and then shattered into tiny shards, glass raining down onto the pavement. Storefronts shook violently, and cars parked nearby rocked on their suspensions. People screamed and ducked for cover, some thrown to the ground by the blast's sheer power. A massive plume of smoke and dust surged into the sky, darkening the bright morning and obscuring the sun. The scent of burning materials mixed with the acrid smell of chemicals filled the air. Panic gripped the crowd as chaos erupted in every direction. Mothers clutched their children tightly. Strangers helped one another up, and people ran blindly, desperate to escape the danger. Emergency sirens pierced the cacophony, growing louder as fire trucks, ambulances, and police vehicles raced to the scene. First responders moved swiftly and efficiently through the debris, their faces grim but determined. They called out orders, tended to the injured, and began the arduous task of securing the area. Some victims were trapped beneath fallen rubble, others bleeding from shattered glass wounds. The scale of the disaster quickly became apparent. News outlets scrambled to broadcast live footage capturing scenes of devastation and shock. Reporters struggled to provide answers, but details remained scarce. The exact location of the blast was identified near a heavily trafficked government building, a place that had previously seemed secure and protected. Speculation ran wild. Was this a tragic accident caused by faulty infrastructure, or a deliberate act of violence designed to strike fear into the nation's heart?
As officials held emergency briefings, the city's residents grappled with disbelief. The explosion had interrupted lives and shattered the illusion of safety. Streets were cordoned off, and curious onlookers were kept at bay by police lines. The normally vibrant area was transformed into a somber scene of destruction and investigation. In the hours that followed, investigators began their work. Forensic teams sifted through debris, searching for clues amid the wreckage. Authorities questioned witnesses and reviewed security footage, piecing together the moments leading up to the blast. Yet, uncertainty lingered, and the possibility of further danger kept the city on edge. The enormous explosion had not only physically rocked Washington, D.C., but it also sent a ripple of fear through its population. This was no ordinary event. It was a shockwave that would reveal hidden secrets, ignite suspicions, and set into motion a chain of events far more complex than anyone could imagine. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the smoldering ruins, investigators meticulously examined the scene where the explosion had ripped through the heart of Washington, D.C. The initial chaos had given way to a grim determination among law enforcement, bomb squads, and forensic experts to uncover the truth behind the devastation. What at first appeared to be a tragic accident was starting to look far more sinister. The blast had originated deep underground in the city's complex network of utility tunnels. These tunnels, normally bustling with maintenance workers and filled with pipes and cables that powered the capital, had become a deadly trap. Early examination revealed that the explosion was far too powerful to have been caused by a simple gas leak or electrical failure. Instead, forensic scientists found residues of explosives that matched military-grade materials, substances rarely encountered outside of professional arsenals. This discovery sent a shock through the investigative teams. The idea of a deliberate attack was no longer just speculation, it had become the leading theory. The sophistication and scale of the blast suggested careful planning and knowledge of the underground infrastructure. It was clear someone had exploited the city's hidden arteries to cause maximum damage. Authorities combed through hours of surveillance footage captured by security cameras positioned around the area. Amid the sea of faces, one figure stood out, a lone individual dressed in dark clothing who had entered the vicinity several hours before the explosion. This person moved with a quiet confidence, avoiding the main paths and cameras whenever possible. Attempts to identify this individual through facial recognition technology initially failed, suggesting deliberate efforts to conceal their identity. The mystery figure's presence intensified fears. Who were they? What was their motive? Could they have been part of a larger group with more devastating plans?
The city was gripped by a tense uncertainty, as people wondered whether the explosion was a singular act of terror or the first strike in a broader campaign. Meanwhile, the FBI took the lead in the investigation, bringing in specialists to analyze the evidence. Agents interviewed witnesses who had been near the blast site, but many recalled only moments of confusion and fear. One thing was certain: the explosion was no accident. Experts noted the placement of the explosives in a way that maximized destruction, demonstrating knowledge beyond that of an average citizen. As investigators dug deeper, a troubling picture began to emerge. The explosion appeared designed as a distraction. While all eyes focused on the shattered streets and wounded victims, other criminal activities had been unfolding elsewhere in the city. Intelligence officers uncovered reports of a massive data breach in a federal building only blocks away from the blast site, happening simultaneously. This breach had compromised sensitive government files, including classified information related to national security. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. The explosion was a smokescreen, a calculated move to divert attention while hackers infiltrated secure systems. The realization sent shockwaves through the government and law enforcement agencies, raising urgent questions about vulnerabilities within the capital's defenses. As the day turned into night, the city remained on edge. Roadblocks, patrols, and heightened security measures were put in place. News outlets speculated on the connections between the blast and the breach. While the public grappled with fear and confusion, what had begun as a violent explosion had now unraveled into a deeper mystery, one that pointed to a sophisticated, organized effort to undermine the city from within. The investigation was no longer just about finding who had set off the bomb. It was about uncovering a hidden enemy capable of striking at the very heart of the nation, using terror and technology in deadly combination. The race to reveal the full extent of the conspiracy had only just begun. As the investigation progressed, startling new information began to surface, reshaping the narrative around the explosion and the data breach. Authorities uncovered a trail leading not to foreign operatives or known terrorist groups, but to someone much closer to home. This revelation sent shockwaves through the agencies involved, as the attack appeared to be orchestrated from within the city itself. A contractor responsible for maintenance in the underground utility tunnels was identified as a person of interest. Known for their expertise and long-standing access to restricted areas, this individual had the knowledge required to exploit the infrastructure. However, it was more than just technical skill that linked them to the crime. Investigators discovered evidence of financial distress and unusual communications with unknown contacts. The contractor had been living beyond their means, with unexplained deposits and withdrawals hinting at involvement in illicit activities. Further scrutiny revealed encrypted messages exchanged over secure channels with an organization seeking to destabilize government operations. This group's motives were murky, but their reach appeared extensive, operating in the shadows to manipulate and disrupt. Authorities pieced together a timeline that suggested the explosion was deliberately engineered to serve as a diversion. While emergency services focused on the blast's aftermath, the contractor's accomplices were working to breach secure networks in the nearby federal building. The chaos created by the explosion masked the true objective, stealing sensitive information that could compromise national security. The scope of the conspiracy extended beyond a single individual or event. Investigators uncovered ties between the contractor and several high-ranking officials within local government agencies. These officials, trusted by the public, were found to be complicit in a web of corruption. They had been secretly funneling classified data to foreign entities and private buyers, enriching themselves at the expense of the country's safety. The explosive attack was a calculated move to cover up their crimes, an effort to distract the public and authorities from their ongoing espionage. The betrayal cut deep, shaking the foundations of trust within the city and government alike. It became clear that the explosion was a symptom of a larger, more dangerous problem, one rooted in greed and deceit at the highest levels. As investigators continued to untangle the web, they faced mounting challenges. Some evidence had been deliberately destroyed or hidden, and witnesses were reluctant to come forward, fearing retaliation. The pressure to solve the case intensified, with the nation watching closely as the story unfolded. The contractor's motives were revealed to be complex. While financial gain was a driving factor, there was also a personal vendetta involved, a sense of betrayal and anger towards the system they had once trusted. This mix of personal grievance and external manipulation created a perfect storm, leading to the catastrophic events. The layers of deception peeled back to reveal a city gripped by internal conflict, where enemies lurked not just in distant lands, but within its own institutions. The investigation was no longer about just a single explosion. It was a battle to expose a sprawling conspiracy threatening to undermine the very core of the nation. With each new discovery, the stakes grew higher. The explosion had been only the beginning, and the truth was far more dangerous and far-reaching than anyone had imagined. The city braced itself as the pursuit of justice entered a critical phase, one that would test the limits of loyalty, courage, and resilience. The investigation took a shocking turn when evidence surfaced implicating one of the lead investigators themselves. Trusted with unraveling the conspiracy, this individual had instead been secretly working to undermine the case from within. It was a betrayal that sent ripples of disbelief through the entire law enforcement community. Documents, emails, and intercepted communications revealed that the investigator had been leaking sensitive information to the various criminal network responsible for the explosion and the data breach. Their motives were tangled, part self-preservation, part greed, and part fear of exposure. This betrayal compromised months of painstaking work and put the entire investigation at risk of collapse. The revelation forced federal authorities to bring in an independent task force from outside agencies to take control. These new investigators approached the case with fresh eyes and heightened caution, determined to recover lost ground and bring the full scope of the conspiracy to light. Under this renewed leadership, the inquiry uncovered a labyrinth of financial accounts, encrypted messaging platforms, encoded instructions that pointed to a global spy ring operating in the shadows of the nation's capital. This network was far more sophisticated and far-reaching than initially thought. They had embedded agents within critical government positions and exploited weak points in security systems to gain access to classified information. The spy ring's operations extended beyond espionage. They orchestrated cyber attacks, manipulated political figures, and influenced decision-making at the highest levels. The explosion and breach were just one chapter in a broader strategy to destabilize the country and advance foreign interests. Investigators worked tirelessly, decoding messages and tracking financial flows across multiple countries. Each new lead exposed further layers of deceit and manipulation, revealing how deeply the spy ring had embedded itself into the city's infrastructure. The danger was no longer abstract, it was immediate and pervasive. Despite the odds, the new task force began making progress. They identified key members of the ring, some of whom were disguised as government employees, contractors, or consultants. Arrest warrants were prepared, and coordinated raids were planned to dismantle the network systematically. The city remained tense as news of the insider betrayal became public. Citizens grappled with the idea that someone sworn to protect them had chosen to betray their trust. The scandal rocked public confidence in law enforcement and government institutions, forcing officials to promise reforms and greater transparency. Meanwhile, the task force's efforts led to the recovery of stolen data and prevented further breaches. The coordinated action disrupted ongoing plots that had the potential to cause even greater harm. Yet the investigation also revealed how vulnerable critical systems had been and how urgent it was to strengthen defenses against such threats. The enormous explosion that had initially seemed like a singular event was now understood as a strategic move in a vast and dangerous game of espionage and corruption. The city's streets, once shaken by the blast, had become the battleground for a fight over the future of national security. As arrests were made and court proceedings began, the public watched closely, eager for justice, but wary of the deep wounds left behind. The betrayal within the investigation had tested the limits of trust and resilience, but it also galvanized a renewed commitment to protecting the city and the nation from hidden enemies. In this chapter of darkness and deception, truth began to shine through. The web of lies was unraveling, and the fight against those who sought to destroy from within had only just begun. The final phase of the investigation brought a whirlwind of arrests, courtroom battles, and the slow process of healing for Washington. D.C., the individuals responsible for the explosion and the espionage scandal, were brought before the courts, facing charges ranging from terrorism to conspiracy and espionage. The contractor who had orchestrated the blast, the corrupt officials who had sold secrets for personal gain, and members of the international spy ring, all faced justice. Trials were closely followed by the public and media, revealing details of the vast conspiracy that had threatened the nation's capital. Testimonies exposed layers of deceit, greed, and betrayal, painting a chilling picture of how deep corruption had allowed enemies to strike from within. The contractor's motives, once a mystery, were laid bare. Desperation, anger, and manipulation had driven them to commit acts that nearly crippled the city. The treacherous investigator who had undermined the case was also prosecuted. Charged with espionage and obstruction of justice, their fall from grace symbolized the dangers of internal betrayal. The legal proceedings sent a strong message that no one was above the law, regardless of position or influence. Despite the grim revelations, the city slowly began to recover. Reforms were implemented across government agencies to tighten security and increase transparency. New protocols ensured that such breaches would be harder to conceal or exploit in the future. Technology upgrades were fast-tracked to protect sensitive information from cyber threats, and law enforcement agencies strengthened their coordination and oversight. The enormous explosion had left physical scars on the cityscape-damaged buildings, closed streets, and memorials to those injured or affected. Beyond the visible destruction, the event sparked a deeper reflection among citizens about trust, safety, and vigilance. The attack had exposed vulnerabilities, but also revealed the resilience of a community determined to rebuild and protect itself. In the months following the trials, efforts were made to support victims and their families. Counseling services, financial assistance, and public memorials honored the courage of those who had endured trauma. The city's spirit, though shaken, remained unbroken. Government officials pledged ongoing commitment to transparency and accountability, acknowledging the failings that had allowed corruption to fester. Citizens demanded vigilance and participated in public forums discussing national security and civil liberties, seeking to balance safety with freedom. The story of the explosion became a cautionary tale, a reminder that threats can come not only from outside enemies, but also from within. It highlighted the importance of vigilance, integrity, and the constant need to safeguard democratic institutions from hidden dangers. Washington, D.C. emerged from the crisis with renewed determination. The investigation and its aftermath underscored that while darkness and betrayal could shake a city to its core, the pursuit of truth and justice could restore hope and strength. The enormous explosion that once sent shockwaves through the nation had ultimately exposed a shadowy conspiracy, toppled corrupt figures, and strengthened the city's defenses. In the end, the resilience of the people and the rule of law prevailed, ensuring that the capital would stand strong against whatever threats the future might hold.